All right. So once again, the session is dedicated to the memory of Leo Fine. He's a Chroch, an ultimate Scotch lover. And on that note, I want to begin a story that a number of years ago, I was at a Scotch tasting at our shul at Beth David. It was a fun evening, and I think Leonard was there for that evening. After you taste one Scotch and you taste another Scotch and they explain and you taste another and you taste another, you forget what you tasted and I don't know if you're half shikkered. I think Laura drove home, but you're supposed to just taste it. You not even necessarily have to swallow it, but you taste it. But being that I can't help myself, I have to do a little bit more than taste it, and I'm tasting mine, and I taste Stephen Wine Rib, Deborah's husband, isn't really such a big drinker, so he'd say you can have mine too. I ended up getting my shares and half of his too. So the story goes, I got up to leave, maybe I went to the bathroom or whatever, and I leave the table, and Stephen takes, they had stuff, other things to drink on the table, and he filled up a little glass with apple juice, and he put it in front of me on the table. And was it Stephen that did it, Deb, or was it you? It was Stephen. And he says, let's see if Marshall notices the difference. So I came back and I see the glass is full. I said, oh, good, so I'll have some of this too. If you look at apple juice and you look at a lot of Scotch, it's exactly the same color. So I drink it and he says, what do you think of this? Tell me what you think of this one. So I take a taste and I'm drinking and I go, it's very fruity. And I barely could even notice after having 6 scotches in my system already that it wasn't even apple juice. And the whole table busted up and started laughing. And it really made me wonder going home afterwards, not only because I made a fool of myself and said that it was a very fruity scotch, but also because it made me think how undiscerning my taste might really be. Because, I started drinking scotch around 1990, 89, 90, somewhere that someone said to me, I went to a bar and they said, what do you want? And I didn't know. I said, I'll have a scotch. What kind of scotch? I don't know. I'm looking at the thing and I said, I'll have a red label scotch. It was the cheapest thing on the thing. So they brought it over and they brought me a glass with a couple of ice cubes, I think, in it or whatever. And I drank it. And it wasn't so good, but I didn't really know much about Scotch. And after having one of those or two of those, I said to the server, I guess I'll have another one of those. And she said to me, are you sure you don't want to try something different? So I said, like what? I don't know anything about it. So she said, well, maybe you want to try Black Label Scotch. It's a notch up. It's a little bit better. It's a blended Scotch. At the time, I wasn't a snob, and I said sure, and I tasted the Black Label, and I could see right away that it was less harsh, it was more smooth, it was better. And then from there, I learned to appreciate what we call single malt scotches, and I started off with what a lot of people start off with, which is a basic 12-year-old in the green bottle Glenfiddich Scotch. Nothing wrong with it. Wonderful Scotch, stands on its own. I found that through the years of the 2000s, everybody jumped on the bandwagon of Scotch. All of a sudden, everybody was a maven and everybody knew everything there is to know. I've got an 18-year-old, I got a 21-year-old, mine's better than yours. I got a 30-year-old Scotch that right from the distillery, from the cask, that's not as good as mine because mine is a lowland and it has smoky, peaty flavors because of the soil. And everybody learned the lingo, the soil, the peat, the water, what they're using in it to make it. This is more, So all of a sudden, people became mavens of not only single malts, but of blended scotches. And they started saying, there are some really expensive good blends out there. You can buy a blended scotch that could be blends of only 25-year-old scotches or better. When they say better, I went one time and I spoke to a person who is an expert on scotches, and he said to me, when they say this is a blend of 15-year-old scotches, they're taking them from barrels, which means they have to be at least 15-year-old. They can't be less, which means you could be getting some 20-year or 21-year-old scotches mixed into that blend. So some blends are better than some single malts. Just putting this as a footnote that we shouldn't become snobs. And speaking about not being a snob, later on, because what was the first drink I ever tasted in my life other than my dad's foam on top of the beer, was the rye whiskey, because in shul, all the people that brought booze to shul for a Thursday morning, or a Sunday morning, brought a bottle of Crown Royal. That was the thing, in the blue
Mm-hmm.
bag with the yellow string
Yep.
on it, and they would show up with the Crown Royal, and you would taste this Crown Royal, and I went, ugh. Anyway, I swore I would never like rye again. It just tasted very harsh to me, and not anything I liked after having Scotch. Lo and behold, some 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, before it became popular, I started to taste bourbons because I wanted to try what they called American whiskey. So, what's the first thing you try? You try Jack Daniels, and I tried it with our Diet Coke, and I poured it, and it's mixed. And then I had some straight, and I went, "This is okay, but it's not great. What's better?" And then you experiment. And you try Blanton's, and you try Bullet Bourbon, and you try this one, and that one, and this one, and you discover that Jack Daniels is not really bourbon, because even though it's American made, it's not made in Kentucky. It's made in Tennessee, and it's a different process slightly, but it's a sweet drink compared to some of the others. What makes bourbons popular is that oakiness, that oaky taste. American whiskeys are really, really wonderful. And then I stopped drinking Scotch and I only went to bourbon. And then I discovered something different. It sounds like I'm a complete alcoholic by this. I discovered that, a lot of bourbons have rye in them. Corn, they have to have about 50% or 51%, I think, to be called bourbon. I think there's a rule, 51%, don't quote me on it, but they put in a high percentage, at least half of corn. Corn is sweeter than rye and malt barley when it's fermented. Well, a lot of it is made with rye. And from bourbon, I went back and started tasting rye again. And I discovered, this isn't so bad. I really like rye. And so it came full circle to what I really thought was disgusting. What is my drink of choice? If I have it sitting there and somebody said to me, "Would you like a drink?" I would take the one thing that you probably would not imagine, and that is a vodka. I'm not a snob. I like a plain vodka. It can be a bottom shelf or a middle shelf vodka. It doesn't have to be an expensive one. And I find that I like it plain. So why am I talking now about vodkas? Because when you go to a bar and you order a drink and you say, "I'll have a martini," in that martini, it's a mixed drink usually, unless your name is Marshall Loomer. I'll explain. Vodka martini. A vodka, first of all, can be made out of grain, it can be made out of potato, it can be made out of celery, for goodness sakes. It can be made out of just about anything. But potato vodkas, by the way, are becoming harder and harder to find. There's a few decent ones around, Luxasova, a few others, but most of them are made from grains and some from mixtures with corn. So vodka, people would say, tastes like rubbing alcohol to me. Why would you want to drink that? Fair. I find it to be a very clean on the palate taste. When you mix it, what do they mix it with? A martini. Vermouth. Well, that could be problematic if you keep kosher, because when you go to a bar and you say, "I'll have a martini," they're putting vermouth in it. Now, if you're not so strict, you're not such a machmir yid and you don't really care, so you could say, "You know what, it's such a tiny drop, I'm not going to worry." But knowing about what we learned on wine and about the issues of not idol worship, we don't recognize that so much as an issue of avodah zarah, but recognizing the whole concept of a grape which can't be used for sanctification, a grape juice or a wine that can't be used for kiddush, is not considered kosher. It wasn't handled and crushed by Jewish people. Well, that means that the vermouth has to be kosher. If you've tasted kosher vermouth, there's only really one brand out there for sweet and dry, and it's Kedem. Kedem vermouth, I hope nobody from Kedem is listening on this class. It isn't my favorite. I don't like it. I think it's awful, actually. I think it's a terrible drink. I hope You know what? I'm recording this. Kedem's going to sue me later. But anyway, you know what? Kedem is a great product at Pesach. I like their wines. They make delicious wines, but it's not
Yes,
my
they do.
favorite for their vermouth. So I have to be careful what I say. Kedem may be the greatest vermouth in the world for many people. For my personal discerning taste, I like other things. So I decided, well, I can't find it. So I'll go without. So essentially, I take some vodka, I put it into a shaker, I put it in with some ice cubes, and I shake the vodka, and then I strain it into a glass. And in that glass, if you go to a bar, they're going to garnish it with something. They're going to garnish it. If it's a lemon peel, it's okay. If it's an olive, it's okay. What if it's a pickled onion? You like onions in your martini. I like onions in my martini. Well, now you have to be careful because the onions in those bottles have to have a COR label on it. They have to be kosher
Mm-hmm.
because pickled onions, some of the varieties contain vermouth in the jarring, in the pickling process. They add vermouth because they find it gives it a beautiful taste, and you almost don't need, if you add those onions to your martini, to put in the vermouth at all. Well, those onions are not kosher. So even garnishes have to be checked. When you buy grape jam, because we talked about wine, you have to be careful because grape jam needs a hechsher because grape is
Yeah.
part of the issue of avodah zarah. And then we talked about pasteurization. And we finished off by talking about, after I spoke too long, we talked about the issue of flash pasteurization compared to regular pasteurization. Why pasteurization? Because it makes the wine, I always forget that, mevushal. It makes it mevushal, means it's boiled, it's brought to a boiling point. And when it's brought to the boiling point, it means that we don't have to worry about people that aren't Jewish that may have handling the wine if they're pouring it for us, or we reach over the table and you give it to them, because we all have family members that aren't Jewish and we might be concerned about that. So therefore we don't have to worry. We buy a mevushal wine. I prefer some wines that are not mevushal. Ava was generous enough to share an email with me about some wines. I think I'm going to ask you to hold them up if you'll have them handy, at least one of them, and show us what it is. But the non-mevushal wines I thought are more expensive, but she brought to my attention that not every one has to be so expensive. Some of the non-mevushal wines, which are not boiled and therefore I consider to be a higher quality, don't have to cost a fortune. Do you have them, Ava? Any of them? To unmute. All right, when you come back, you'll get it unmute. So we talk about that. But now that we're on the subject of whiskeys, and we're going to talk about the laws and the halachas of whiskeys, it brings to mind, going back to my kashrut classes, about dishes, when we talked about dishes. And I said, some things you can kosher, like if you trafe up a metal spoon or a glass bowl, you can pour boiling water over it. The way it became not kosher is the way you make it kosher again. If you poured something treif on it, then you pour boiling water over it. It's called irui, and you can kosher it. If you took the spoon and put it into something treif and you stirred it by accident because you were cooking so then you have to immerse it into boiling water. Why do where do we learn this from? From the laws of Pesach. From the laws of Pesach, it teaches us that for Pesach we have to be extra strict. Even 1 grain of something forbidden in the whole swimming pool full of soup will forbid the entire soup. The 1/60th rule of Batul Vashishim that we spoke about, if it's less than 1/60th, does not apply on Passover. Passover must be none, no chametz in the product at all. So what is that? A great time for koshering our utensils. Because when you kosher a utensil, you have a decision you can make at that time. You say, okay, I'm koshering for Pesach. I'm going to kosher my forks and knives. And let's say you're not in a position where you don't want to overload your house with 6 sets of cutlery. You want to use the same cutlery. It's exactly the same if you kosher it or buy new. One is not better than the other. So now, you've koshered the cutlery, and now you have a decision. Am I going to now make this dairy or meat? Because once you kosher it, it's parv. If you have meat cutlery and you kosher it, because Rivi tilted her head when I said that.
Yeah.
If you meat cutlery and you kosher the cutlery, it's now parv because you've immersed it in boiling water. And now it's like it's brand new. And now you can decide, you know what? I always like this pattern better. I want to use it for dairy. You can do that. That's your opportunity to do that. The rabbis don't like it when we go back and forth from one to the other during the year. You can if you have to, but you shouldn't. So in the background of all of this process, I brought forward the idea of dishes. I said, you're not supposed to kosher dishes that are clay. And you're wondering, why is he talking about dishes? We're supposed to talk about whiskey. I'm getting there. Because dishes that are china or earthenware, it says you're not supposed to kosher earthenware. But our rabbis teach us, if there's a tzorech, a need to use those dishes, they have special sentimental value. And they're china, not just earthenware, but they're good chinaware.
Yeah.
Now you can kosher it, but you have to kosher it in boiling water. If you've ever taken a fine bone china piece and put it into rolling, boiling water, it will basically crack and get all these cracks in it, and it's ruined. And you've ruined your Limoges set. So now, what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? So I learned from Rabbi Fink that in Yerushalayim, that you temper it if you're going to do this process. But before you temper it, you have to kosher it in a way. You clean it. Then after you clean it, it has to sit for 1 whole year unused. So the dishes that you inherit from your grandmother that are china, that are worth $1,000 that you want to keep because you don't want to throw them out and donate them to Value Village because they weren't kosher, because my grandma Ethel never kept kosher. She liked her bacon and eggs on Sunday morning. So now you want to use those plates. So what are you going to do? You let them sit an entire year unused. Now you get a pot of water on the stove that's hot, not boiling, maybe 70 degrees. And you put them into that water till the dishes reach that temperature. Then you move them one at a time into a hotter pot, a 90-degree pot. And then finally you do a quick dip into the boiling water one because you've tempered it and warmed it up slowly and did it quickly. Just take it from being a cold dish and putting it into the boiling water and ruining it. You've tempered it and then you've dipped it and you've koshered that kli cheres. You've koshered that china and you can go ahead and use it. Who cares? Well, I care because when it comes to buying scotch, some of the scotches, like this one, I brought forward the bottle of Little Mill last week, so I'm going to bring forward 2 more Little Mills. Why? It's my show-off bottles because the distillery burnt down. It was started in 1776, then it burnt down somewhere in the early 2000s, and there is no more to ever be made ever again. For history, for the rest of everyone's life, it's never going to happen again, ever. There'll never be any more Little Mill. Finished, the distillery's gone. All the way from the 1700s until now, it's done. So the bottle that cost $150, $160, this is a Little Mill put by a third-party bottler, Hart Brothers, is now, this bottle is about $1,500, $2,000, and I paid $150 for it. Why did I buy it? I bought it because I like it. I like it. I didn't buy it because it's going to be, now the scotch that I love to drink most in the world, I'm afraid to open. And I think that that's a shame. I think I should open it and drink it because what the heck am I saving it for? You know what I mean? Like, who cares if it's worth $50,000? Well, if it's worth $50,000, I can buy a car. Maybe I'll sell it. But, you know, you look at the value and you say, what do I need this for? So this is plain lowland scotch that is 19 years old, okay? Distilled 19 years. The problem with this is nothing. It's a wonderful scotch. It was distilled in 1990 and it was bottled in 2010. Okay, fine. Big deal. Here is another bottle distilled by the third-party bottler of Hart Brothers. And it's a Little Mill 21-year-old. Okay? The problem with this, some people would say, is that it says on it, Little Mill Distillery, first sherry butt filled. Well, what does that mean? It means that it was casked at some point in a cask that used to hold sherry. Why do they do that? I thought they did it because it's fancier. It gives a beautiful taste. And sherry will improve the taste of the scotch. From what I understand from history, is all of that is accidental. It means that that wasn't the initial intention when they first started doing that. The initial intention was to make scotch. There's no barrels. Do you know how much a sherry barrel costs? If you can get one, they could cost up to $1,000. These barrels aren't $10. So now the barrels, these wooden barrels, you're making scotch and you want to put your scotch into something to age, you buy barrels. So I'm buying barrels from a company from France that made sherry, or California, whatever it is, and they ship them to me. And now I'm going to put my scotch in those barrels. So the question is, if it was casked in a sherry cask, period, meaning they made the scotch, they put it into a cask that used to have sherry in it, the question becomes, how long has that barrel sat for before they put the scotch into the barrel? If the barrel sat for 1 year and dried out, then whatever you're putting in there is nullified. Whatever was in there before is nullified. How do we know that? Not because of the rule of Batel Vashishim, which is what you're going to think. It's less than 1/60th. That's not why. Because in the Gemara, we are taught something very interesting. We are taught, remember we talked about milk, and you're outside the fence and somebody's milking the cows, and the person milking the cow is Jewish. Well, if we were going to start, and then we were going to, after they're finished milking, we say, okay, now it's my turn. I'm going to milk my cows myself, and I'm going to go in there and milk the cows. I'm going to bring my own pail, right? I'm going to bring my own pail. And now I go, oops, I forgot I didn't bring a pail. Can I use your pail? And he says, yeah, but I used my pail to milk the non-kosher horses over there. You know what I mean? Or the chazerim. So you're saying, oh yeah, I can't use your pail. Your pail had pig milk in it. How can I put my cow milk in there? Gemara says, the poskim say, if you see that it's empty, the barrel's empty, not even washed out, but it's empty, you can go ahead and just milk your kosher cows into that barrel and you can drink the milk and you can have it and it's fine. I find that shocking. But when you learn the rules about notain tam lifgam, something that gives a foul taste, and we talked about kashrut when I said, you're making a cholent and your neighbor comes over and shows you the cholent. Remember I said this, and oops, he drops a piece of Italian pork sausage right inside your cholent, and it got buried inside the cholent, and you can't even find it in there in the cholent anymore. You can eat the cholent, pork and all. You can eat the whole thing. How can you do that? Because it's not just no taint tam lifgam, it's bato vashishim and no taint tam lifgam. Meaning, well, I shouldn't, this is what our rabbis teach us, but I don't necessarily agree with it 100%. The rabbis assume that we will find that the pork piece that fell in will be repulsive to us. Now, if I tell you, I want you to eat a pork souvlaki and wash it down with a glass of milk, most of you will be repulsed by that and say, fit, treif, I can't do that. But there is somebody out there that would say, oh, it sounds delicious, a milkshake and a pork souvlaki. Because if they experienced it and they've had it and they liked it, they might think it's a good taste. But our rabbis assume that we will find it to be repulsive. And because it's not imparting a good taste, it's imparting a bad taste, a pagum taste. Therefore, that bad taste becomes something that is allowed. It's allowed. So the question is a scotch that is casked in the first sherry cask that is wet, is that something that we can drink? Or, well, we can drink anything we want if we don't care about kashrut, but is it something that we care about? So years ago, because I'm a troublemaker, I always have been and I always will be, I confronted Rabbi, not Yaakov Kerzner, his father, Yitzchak Kerzner, head of OU in Toronto, head of the Vada Kashrut. And I spoke to him and I said to him, Rabbi Kerzner, you're puskening that all of these scotches are not kosher because were sherry casked. I said, if it just says sherry cask on it, it means it's been cast once, twice, 3 times. It could have been who knows what from where. And they probably sat for a year. And it's not even a first casking. So if the cask is dried out, wouldn't that be the 1/60th rule? It's not being intentionally to make it. So he said to me, don't tell me about Scotch. Are you going to tell me that you know more than I know from the experts that tell me this? Well, I didn't have the chutzpah to start arguing with him. I think by that time he already hung up the phone on me anyway. But nevertheless, you're not going to phone him back and go, Rabbi, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't do that. You have to have derech eretz and respect. So years go by, and all of a sudden, a few years ago, they say that certain sherry cask scotches are okay all of a sudden. Oh, because they said it's okay. But that's okay. I'm glad. There are some people that still won't drink it, but plenty will. So what is Scotch, for instance? It's a process. It's malted barley, which is soaked in water and ferments and then dries through this complex drying process. And then the malt is ground and then mixed with hot water. And the mixture is distilled by heating the mixture to 173.2 degrees. Now, temperature back in the days of the Gemara didn't mean anything. All they knew was that, by the way, temperature wasn't even invented then. They didn't know what 72 degrees or 172 degrees was. They knew that something was yad soleted bo. I've talked about it in every class. You put your hand in it, your hand recoils, it's too hot. It's a rolling boil. So they knew that. And when I talked about the issue of the wine being pasteurized or flash pasteurized, many of the from communities will not accept flash pasteurization because they say the barrels are closed. Nothing escapes when you're boiling it. If no steam escapes, if nothing is evaporating, we don't call that in a process. So they might have a hechsher on it, but it might not have the hechsher that you want on it. I always look at it like this. I don't want to be the mashgiach for the mashgichim. I'm not interested in trying to be the mashgiach over the mashgiachs. If somebody says it's kosher and they give a decent certification on it, I'm good with it. That doesn't mean everybody is, but I am. There are certain things that are questionable because you have to look at what the majority follow. There are kashruts out there that are questionable that might be okay for gavina but not okay for meat, like tablet K, for instance. You might say, oh, I like the cheese, so I'll buy it because it has a hechsher on it. At least I'll be lenient. Or KOJ, which makes the jelly candies, which contain gelatin in it, which you might say, oh, I don't like that hechsher, I'm not going to have it. Why don't we have it? We don't have it because our community might not have it. If everybody in our community said it was good, we'd all have it. But if everybody doesn't say it's good, we don't have it. It's like the issue of the microwave ovens on Pesach. If your rabbi kashers it, you can kasher it. If your rabbi doesn't kasher it, so you don't kasher it. You know, I always find that to be an interesting idea. So there's a halachic concern with these whiskeys. See, in a wine cask, like a sherry cask, it's named because some type of wine that was matured in it before it was whiskey is what creates the issue of halachic concern, of Jewish law concern. So since it absorbed the wine, the cask absorbed the wine of non-Jews that made it, since the wine from the non-Jew is forbidden, in technical terms in Jewish law it's called stam yenam, the absorbed wine will now, they're afraid, leach into the Scotch and could cause it to be forbidden to everyone. So I always talk about the Igrot Moshe because he's our modern posek. Igrot Moshe is a book. We always say the Igrot Moshe says. Well, the Igrot Moshe doesn't really say. It's the book that says, and that's Rav Moshe Feinstein. And he deals with the question regarding this, but he rules very leniently, which I was surprised at. which was another reason why when I went to Rabbi Kerzner, I say, well, if it's good enough for Rav Moshe Feinstein, why isn't it good? But then you go on and you learn. Whenever Rav Moshe Feinstein gives a ruling, you have to look later on in his tshuvas to see, did he stick with that ruling or did he change the ruling? Because sometimes these rabbis do a 180. It's all rabbis do is argue with each other all day long. Somebody's unmuted. Oh, it's Ian. Okay, we'll just mute. There we go. So in order to look at the avenues and the possibilities of a Scotch, you need to go through the whole maturation process, how it is made. So years ago, distillers did not intend to impart the sherry taste into the whiskey. You can't help it. It's a house. Phones ring. So they never wanted the sherry taste inside the whiskey. So there really wasn't any reason to assume that its taste is going to be anything more desirable. It's a barrel, and if a barrel, what do we care? But then, even though the wine was forbidden because of the non-Jewish handling, because of the stam yenam issue, the issue of the barrel, it would be nullified because of the 1/60th rule. A tiny little bit of leaching is not enough to overtake the flavor of the Scotch. In other words, when you taste the Scotch, this is very important. This is a very important point. This is the same point in kashrut when it comes to bread, by the way. Bread is a big thing, because bread in the olden days was the main staple of a meal. They ate bread, and with bread you had a little meat. You couldn't afford. Who was going out shechting cows all day long? We didn't have big plants. You had to go and find your own animal or your own chicken. So these things were special. So you had this much bread, and you had this much of other things, a little bit of vegetable, a little bit of meat, and you'd fill up on bread, and bread was the way it was. And I remember even in my time growing up, it was like, here, have another piece of bread. They want to fill me up on bread. Today, we eat completely differently. Nobody wants to eat bread. I want it, and that's why I gained weight. But people, nobody wants to eat the bread. They always want to have all the other stuff. So what do? You take a little piece this big, a little dos pintele, and you make hamotzi, and you eat the little piece of bread, and they put it away, and they go, I don't want the carbs. But then they fill up on mashed potatoes anyway. But anyway, they'll say they don't want the carbs. I don't want the carbs. So if the sherry taste is not overbearing, it's not the taste. Like if you take a pound of honey and you mix it with dough and you make a bread, is it honey cake or is it bread with honey in it? I would go so far as to say it's honey cake, because if you put in that much honey, when you taste it, the first thing you taste on a honey cake is honey. The first thing you taste in a honey cake is not, oh, this tastes like a bread. I'm going to have 16 slices of honey cake and a little bit of meat. It's not bread. We don't call it bread. Same thing with this. If the taste is secondary to the taste of the Scotch or the whiskey or the rye or whatever it is that you're drinking, then it really becomes batul vashishim. So nowadays it's clear that sherry casks are used specifically to impart a desirable flavor. We've discovered this is a good thing. It gives a reddish color. It makes it taste good. We like the finish because we all found this fancy language all of a sudden. It has a sherry finish. How do we know it has a sherry finish? Probably because it said so on the bottle. My discerning taste isn't so good. Yours is better than mine. So if you taste it and you say, I taste chocolate. I always read these wine bottles and I'm fascinating. They go, it has a hint of blueberry and cherry with a smoky flavor attached to chocolate, and they always say these things. And I'm going, I taste grape and wine. I don't taste any of these things. I don't know what they're talking about. Like I taste whiskey. Can't tell you if you poured it into a glass and you gave it to me. If I can't tell the difference between apple juice that Stephen Weinrib gave me on the table or fancy Scotch, how am I going to know if it was a sherry cask or not? But there are people out there that know. Martin Cates would know. He would know if it has sherry in it, but Marshall Loomer, not so much. So without other mitigating factors, it's not so simple to say that wine is nullified in the Scotch anymore. Because of why? Because it's now something which we learned in the first class of kashrut. I taught you two terms. I taught you lechatchila, which means from the start, from the beginning, and I taught you b'di'evet. So now you can go to yeshiva. You learn two things. So what it is b'di'evet means unintentionally. I was on my way and I'm walking on the street and the motion sensor went off on Shabbos, but I didn't mean to set it off. That's b'di'evet. You had nothing to do. You didn't care if the motion sensor was there. I don't care if the scotch is in a sherry cask or it's not in a sherry cask. But that's not the issue now, because when I'm buying it, it's on the label and it says sherry casked. So should I go out and buy the bottle that's sherry casked? Or should I buy the one next to it that says it's not sherry casked? You have a choice. So now you've become an expert, a maven, and you want the one that's sherry casked because you like it better. You discovered that you like the finish better. So it's different. How does that apply? So there's debates that go on, and they talk about the sharpness of the taste and the taste that's imparted by it, and does it make it better or does it make it worse, and why did they add it? So the manufacturers and experts claim that sherry enhances the Scotch whiskey. Well, we also learned in kashrut that we're supposed to trust somebody called the kfela, a professional chef. They don't want to risk their reputation. They're telling us it's better. If they're the experts, they must know better than me. So if they claim that it enhances the Scotch whiskey, then it enhances it. Must be better. So the manufacturers, the Scotch experts, claim that it's better and it's desirable. And the Shulchan Aruch writes that in general, that wine blios, putting in different kinds of wine like this, are detrimental. They say it's detrimental. It's not a good thing because you're mixing. And it's clear that this is not the case with Scotch, and that the reason is that they have these stringent rules that say that if something gives a good flavor, we can't. This is how, you see, the Jews. Only Jews can come up with a paskening, a ruling like this in the Shulchan Aruch. You got to hear this. If it imparts a bad taste, you can have it. It's such a Jewish thing. What do we have to suffer? But if it imparts a good taste, you can't have it. I find that so, I'm laughing because I find that so Jewish. And it's not only that it's so Jewish, but it's actually in the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. Yosef Karo, the head rabbi, chief Sephardic rabbi who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, said, if the manufacturer claims then it's giving a good flavor, then it has to be considered halachically that it's not batel vashishim, doesn't apply, and you can't have it, it's asur, you can't have it. But if it gives a foul taste, remember I said the piece of pork falls into your delicious chillent, oh, that you can have. But to have something that makes something taste better, no! So this becomes the discussion and the argument. So we move forward and we go to rulings. And then we'll come to the final ruling. Many claim that one can be lenient, this is Moshe Feinstein again, to permit Scotch matured in sherry casks based on his words. Moshe Feinstein considered the taste of wine to be nullified in 6 parts of any beverage. However, it is not a simple conclusion that his ruling applies to our case. And then he explains this. Number 1, it's important to realize that even where the allowance of Moshe Feinstein did apply, that he concludes that a bal nefesh should be stringent. Here it comes again. If you are a regular Jew, then you can have it, and I won't say anything and I'll look the other way. But if you're a bal nefesh means one who is in control of their soul. Well, that makes me feel pretty bad, doesn't it? I'm not a bal nefesh. I don't care about my soul and where it goes. I can go to heaven or hell because I'll have friends in both places. Well, that's not the idea. It's not how we're supposed to think. So you're going to admit, I'm not a bal nefesh, so I'll drink it because it tastes better. Or, I am a bal nefesh, so I better buy the one that's next to it. It's a Jewish thing to make the rabbis, to make us feel guilty for wanting the better Scotch. So now they're telling us, leave the good Scotch to other people. The Jews can suffer and have the bad Scotch. It's like, what kind of a thing is that? If you're a Baal Nefesh, you should be stringent. Well, a lot of these rabbis do that. Ovadia Yosef was the chief Sephardic rabbi in Israel, and he once puskined, when donuts started to come about big in Israel, Hanukkah fancy donuts, he was asked about because the Sephardic ruling is, it's not good enough for a Jew to turn on the fire or turn on the stove. You have to be involved in the cooking process. So they said, if an Ashkenazi just says, just turn on the fire, and then the non-Jewish workers that are there can make the sufganiyot, and they're good enough, and I can eat them. So Rav Avodia Yosef, he didn't want to go against all the people in Israel who love a sufganiyah, who want to eat it, made in oil that was never, the dough was never dropped into the oil by a Jew. So he said, it's okay, you can eat it. But if you're a Baal Nefesh, maybe you should eat at a place where the Jew does drop the dough and it has some involvement in the cooking, so we know that it's really kosher. It goes back to the issue on the LL plane. I always say, do you want the kosher meal or do you want the really kosher meal, the one that's triple wrapped, the glatt kosher meal? And I always go, well, what's the difference? One has 3 wrappings on it, one doesn't. If they told me it tasted better, I would take the other one all the time. But kosher is kosher. So the Igra Moshe, Rav Moshe Feinstein is saying, if you really, really care, maybe you should be strict. Now, he goes on to talk about why it might be forbidden. And he says there might not be the 6 times the amount of Scotch in relation to the total volume of the sides of the glass and the head and the base and the barrel of the barrel. If you add up all the square centimeters or inches of what the barrel is and what the process is of maturation and how much would bleed into it, can we really determine that it's Batul Vashishim? And secondly, he goes into discussing a case where it was unclear if wine had been added to the whiskey at all. Well, that's a whole different story. If wine or sherry is actually added to the whiskey to flavor it, it's not kosher. We know this from Absolute Vodka. Absolute Vodka is one of the vodkas out there that actually has an OU right on the bottle. Not that vodka necessarily has to have a hechsher, but it has it. But their flavored ones are not kosher because they contain grape alcohol. That's what happened right now with the whole controversy with Grey Goose. All of a sudden, they're all up in arms because all the Frummy Hasidim were all drinking Grey Goose. It was fancy. I guess someone was sponsoring it. They could afford it. Now they can't have Grey Goose because they discovered that they're adding grape alcohol to the Grey Goose to enhance it. Once that's being done, it's forbidden to us. So if they're adding sherry to the whiskey, it's asur. There's no question. We can't even think about it. You can't have it. But if it's part of the natural process of that it was casked and the casking is causing it to have that flavor, then you have to think to yourself, all right, if I bought this bottle at a time when it wasn't believed that it would enhance the flavor, that's one thing. But now that we know that it does, maybe we're not supposed to have it. I'm not here to tell you whether you should drink it or not drink it. I'm here to tell you what the rabbis tell us. So there's always something called a conclusion. It's what we call Pesach. Pesach means the final decision, the Pesach Halacha. So it's hard to come up with a conclusion that tells us that something could be forbidden when it was matured in a sherry cask. Moshe Feinstein first said it was okay, and then he said, but if you really care about yourself, then maybe you should be more careful and not have it. What does that mean? If I have a beard, then I shouldn't drink it, but if I don't have a beard, then it's okay to drink it? I don't really know what that means. You have to interpret that as to say, do you consider yourself someone who is a bal nefesh. Look up the terms yourself and figure it out. But then there's other people that follow the issue of the Chazon Ish. I don't know how many people have been there for Sudah Shlishit when Rabbi Shaim used to do show and tell before Pesach. And he brought this glass, and it was a glass that had lines on it. Noreen remembers it. And the lines said, this is the measurement according to the Chazon Ish, and these are the measurements of Rabbi Nawi. Rabbi Nawi is a great Rav who wrote a lot of tshuvas and a lot of things. He's an expert on shiurim. I don't mean shiurim by classes, but shiurim by measurements. He was an expert on measurements, and we follow his rulings mostly. And the Chazon Ish as well. And it gives you what he considers to be, what they consider to be a kazait. The Chazon Ish says a kazait is that much. You have to eat that much. And the Rav Noe will say it's less, it's this much. And then the Chazon Ish will say a revi'it for drinking on Pesach is that much. And the Chazon Ish and Rav Noe will say it's only that much. There's two rabbis, you're going to have three opinions. It's always the way. So we come up with what is the ruling, what is the reason. The Chazon Ish, who was greatly followed on shiurim as well, said that all Scotch matured in any form of a sherry cask, to say that it's forbidden is not simple. But to simply assume leniency is certainly not accurate at all. Do you want me to read it again? Are you confused? So what he's saying is, to say that it's all accepted, well, we can't really say that. To say it's all forbidden, well, we can't really say that. So it's interesting. So I think the answer is, you really have to decide for yourself who you want to follow and what the process was. So if it says first sherry butt cask, whatever that means, maybe you want to avoid it. Maybe you don't. I follow Batul Vashishim. I follow that there is an intention to everything we do. And if your intention is to buy something deliberately because you know it's the wrong thing to do, but you want to do it anyway, then that's not a good idea. If something happens and it's b'di'evid, and it happened to be this, I think there's room to be lenient. I did not buy this scotch, I can tell you right now, because it said sherry on it. I bought it because there was only 2 bottles in the liquor store. I remember going all the way out to Bayview not Bayview store, but the one further south, to buy these bottles because it was the only ones left of Little Mill, because I wanted to buy it because I heard the distillery was no longer. So I bought them. I could have cared less if it had it on it or not. Well, I can't say I could have cared less that I'm driving by Burger King and I had a cheeseburger because it was the closest thing to eat either. So you have to make a ruling and decide what is the leniency going to be. The Pesach Halacha, the ruling. In a case that the scotch is exclusively matured in sherry casks, there is the most concern. As mentioned above, the fact that money, time, and effort are spent to mature the scotch in the sherry casks forces us to reckon with the forbidden wine. Meaning, if great lengths are going to infuse this with sherry to make it that it's a predominant thing, that we're selling it to you because it's special, because it's in a sherry cask, that's a reason to be concerned. If that wasn't the process, and you're buying it, or you know that the scotch is casked in sherry casks because that's the casks they could get, then the question becomes, were the casks dried out and sitting like the milk jug that had the pork milk, the pig milk in it that you took and then milked your cows and you drank the milk because the Gemara says we're allowed to? And I say there's great room for leniency. I think there's great room for leniency because I want to drink the scotch that has the sherry in it. If I didn't care and I was a bourbon, I'd say there's other things you can drink, but I don't think it's fair. You know what I mean? A lot of things that we do are not fair. So there is no longer any opinion to rely upon to be lenient completely. If the Scotch is matured exclusively in sherry cask, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, the wine will not be nullified according to all opinions and is forbidden to be consumed. What does that mean? It means that I have to take this bottle and put it up for sale. I can't drink it. Because when they matured this Scotch, they matured it exclusively in a sherry cask. It was done lechatchila on purpose so they could advertise it in the process to make it a better Scotch to sell it to us. It's forbidden. That's the Pesach. See, I knew I'd get there. But here's how you can buy a sherry cask Scotch. If it says it was a second casking, then you can have it. You know why? No tain tam bar nut. What does that mean? For those of you who attended my kashrut class, I said there's a difference between a first taste. We took the Scotch, we put the mash in the whatever they do into the barrel to age in the sherry, once holding sherry cask, and that's going to make our Scotch. Or we are going to mature the Scotch for 10 years in oak casks, whatever that oak cask might be. It might be a bourbon cask. And then they take that cask and they do a second cask. Did you know this? They take it from that cask and they pour it into, Isaac knows this, you see, because he's nodding, and they pour it into a second cask. And then the second cask, it was a sherry cask. Our Chazal, our rabbis teach us that if it's a secondary taste, then it's nothing to do with a midoraisa. It's nothing to do with a Torah law of avodah zarah. It's all only at most a rabbinic ruling, and because it's a secondary taste, it's completely, all of a sudden, batul vashishim. My favorite rule, 1/6 of the drink or 1/60th of the volume comes into play, and we don't have to worry anymore about no tain tam lifgam. It's giving us a bad taste, and you can have it. And there are so many rye whiskeys and Scotch whiskeys and bourbon whiskeys that are second casked. If you look at Balvenie Doublewood, it means it was casked in an oak cask, and then it was transferred later into a sherry cask. That's called a no tain tam bar nut, no tain tam bar nut, no tain tam bar nut, and it's a secondary taste, and you can go ahead and you can have it because it wasn't going to be consumed as being the entire thickness of the cask being measured by the volume. You don't even have to think about it because it wasn't even the first casking, it was the secondary casking. So the first cask Scotch that I have here in the house here, I can't even drink it if I want to be according to what the Igros Moshe says. I cannot drink it. I can have the other one. So that's the leniency. You need to have a second casking. And some of them are even go as far as third caskings. Now, there's one more leniency. That whole conclusion that we talked about of Scotch being aged in casks, it's forbidden for the first time in a sherry cask. However, in a case where there's a mixture of cask used, now there's another leniency. So they take sherry cask Scotches. I have 5 minutes to go, Noreen's telling me. I got it, Noreen. I don't want to do what I did last week. I talked too much. We can have a third class, by the way. I can do it, and I want to do it. I'll tell you why. I want to cover the other alcohols, and I want to cover the liqueurs, because liqueurs is a fascinating thing. All of the liqueurs and what's kosher. Esther likes liqueurs, so we have to cover that. But if they take a sherry cask Scotch and they blend it with another single malt Scotch that is not sherry casked, then there's room to be lenient. And the Gedolim say you have plenty to rely on, and you can have that as well. So I'm going to stop talking about Scotches. I want Ava to share those bottles of wine with us just before we leave. I think it's nice to share something from our collection and something that we've enjoyed drinking ourselves, so we can think about that. Ava.
I have one bottle. Hang on.
What is it?
It is Galil Mountain Syrah.
Oh, the Syrah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
And you like it?
And I don't know if you could see that, if it's backwoods,
No, I see it. It's a not a
Yes.
Mavuno.
but yeah,
It's kosher Pesach.
it is. Yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to just share one more thing just before we part company. There is a website, if you want to learn everything, you can go onto it. It's called the CRC Kashrut website. It's fantastic. It lists all of the boozes you can have and can't have. Most beers are kosher unless they're flavored beers. You got to be careful with flavored anything. And I'll tell you something else that is not kosher, which you can make your own decisions on as to why, and you know why. But things like this, like Remy Martin, okay? So you have a nice fine cognac. It's made from grape. It's made from wine. It's asur. There's no way to make it possibly kosher. You can drink it if you want to, but I can't tell you to drink it. And one more final thought when it comes to brandies. See this bottle here? Everybody has seen it in the liquor store. You can't see it because it says Pesach on it. It says Pesach. I put a Pesach label on it. It's BBB brandy. All right, it doesn't taste great, but it's Pesach day, and I like to have a drink on Pesach. So I bought this bottle. Now I learned something interesting because I see it has a little bit left in it. I go, how can it have a little bit left? You are allowed to keep liqueurs from 1 year to the next if you seal it at the end of Pesach, label it with something, and do not open it up until next Pesach. Because if you're not going to drink a whole bottle of brandy on Pesach, well, if you are, you're going to be a happy person. But if you just want to have a taste, I've had this bottle for at least 10 years. Okay, so it proves I'm not a complete shicker, and it has a little bit left in it, and I've had it for at least 10 years. And well, I'll tell you how long I've had it. I bought it from Simcha Wines. They don't even exist anymore. I don't think. Do they? I don't know. Maybe they do. They do wine? Oh, I'm sorry. They exist. They're happy. They're in business. Everybody go to Simcha Wines if you're watching this show. Everybody. So anyway, this bottle is kosher Pesach, as it says in the back. It's a brandy, and it says in the front it's from Israel. And you don't, if you label it with something that you know that tells you it's asur to open it, do not open it. And you don't open it during the whole year, you're allowed to uncork it or unscrew it again next Pesach and enjoy it from 1 year to the next. You don't have to finish it. And it's kind of a nice tradition because every Pesach you open up the same thing. And it's kind of a cool thing to be able to do. So I'm going to open it up just to say, is anybody interested in another session on the liqueurs and all of those other whiskey? You are, Noreen? Okay, I'll do one more with Esther and Rivi. We'll do one, and Leonard. Okay, so and Ava too. Let's do one more on this because I find it interesting to find the sources from the Gemara and our scholars. And we'll finish up by tackling a little bit about this and overlapping into the next area next week. And then after that, I want to go into something different. I want to talk about technology, the use of technology, and the use of technology on Shabbat, and the use of it during the rest of the year. What's kosher and what isn't. But let's finish this first. So thank you for Alex Roth for sharing the book with me on whiskey, wine, whiskey, and halacha. It's an overview. It's available by Harav Shraga Kalus. A lot of what I told you today I learned from other Rabbanim too, but this book is a fantastic, fantastic source. And it lists over 250 practical Scotch examples in the book as well. Wine, whiskey, and halacha. So thank you for everyone I'm going to stop talking and...
Marshall, I have a question.
Okay, sure.
The 2 bottles of Scotch that you showed us, the Hart bottles, are they corked or are they screwed?
Corked.
How do you store them?
You don't have to, Scotch, you don't have to store lying down.
So how do you store yours?
Sitting up in a dark cupboard in the basement.
You're going to have a problem if you ever decide to drink it. And that is the cork has dried out. So now My suggestion to you is if you ever do want to open it, cut the top off the cork and push it into the bottle. And it'll save you getting all the segment.
Right. So it's a little. You're right to a degree. If you sit that long with wine, unless you let it sit on the side to keep the cork wet, you're supposed to do that even with scotches.
Well, that $1,500 bottle that I had, I tried to lift out the cork and it snapped
It crumbled. Yeah, they'll snap.
very quickly, just very quickly. One
So
push.
that's good advice, everyone. Keep your fancy scotches on the side so you wet the corks. That's very good advice.
And Adele cleaned up the top and we pushed it in. We had no sediment from the cork.
Right. And you know what? And the one thing about scotch is it doesn't go bad. You can keep it
Great.
for a long, long time.
Yeah.
All right. So
Marshall, have you heard about angel's breath?
tell me about it.
Angel's breath is the amount of alcohol that evaporates from your bottle of scotch over time. And I was at a Scotch museum when I was in Scotland, and they showed how much you could actually lose from an unopened bottle of scotch over time. And it's called angel's breath.
Okay. Good to know.
I don't know if it's a kosher angel, a heavenly angel.
Marshall, what I noticed is when we turned the whiskey bottle on its side, after Marvin tried to open it, I could actually see air bubbles
That's a problem.
until we pushed the cork right in and poured it out.
And it had a seal around the cork too. It was sealed, like it had a seal around it.
Yes,
Wow.
totally sealed, totally.
Okay.
I hadn't lost anything in the way of content, but it is the greatest tasting thing I ever had in Scotch.
I'm sure. You know what? The problem is that it's not a problem, but it's the reality. I would have been just as happy because I liked this Scotch before it went up in value, which means when it was what it was, I was happy with it then. I didn't care, and I would have opened it and I would have had some already by now. When someone tells you that something's valuable or worth a lot of money, you're hesitant to open it. Why? I have no idea. I think it's silly. And I think we live once, and you should drink it and enjoy it, and don't save it for a rainy day. So I think
I agree.
that's the best
What we're
advice.
doing.
There's no tomorrow, and enjoy a little bit of it today because we all have experienced that
Right.
in a lifetime. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and let's meet again next week. I'll tell Cora to put us up for one more session.
Try for 12:30. It works a little better.
I like it, but she said no because it fights with Bracha Feder session. I don't want to fight with anybody. I'm easygoing. I'll do it at any time, but
This
Okay.
works.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Bye,
Marshall.
everyone.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye,
See you.
everyone. Thank you.
See you,
Thank
everyone.
2 hours. Bye.
Yeah, sure.
So Marshall, the ultimate question, Isla or Speyside?
Oh, that's a good question. So
Bayside.
Speyside.
Speyside.
That's why. Tell me why. Pete.
Islay is the variety that is dried with peat and has a smoky taste and tastes like cigarettes. If you're,
Well, wait a minute.
Unless you like peat.
I'm a big fan of listen, the very first peaty Scotch I had in my life was the Bowmore 12 and then the 15. But I really, really enjoy Ardbeg. Ardbeg is very peaty. Is that a Speyside or a low? What is that?
well, that would be.
Ardbeg is an Isla.
Yeah.
Okay, so some people say
It's an
Islay,
Islay.
some people say Ule. You know, there in Scotland they say it's an Ule. But whatever you call it, Islay, Ule, Isla.
Or Islay.
Or
If you don't
Islay.
know.
In Spain, it's Ole.
I will say that I love the peaty, smoky scotches. I think they're really wonderful, but not everybody does. I mean,
Have you ever
Speyside.
tried Octomore?
no, but I could.
Bruichladdich, it's the peatiest Scotch you can buy.
Wow.
They talk in terms of parts per million of peat. And this stuff is just, You know, if you want bragging rights on peatiness, it doesn't get stronger than that. Octomore. It's from Brooklady.
Okay. That's interesting. I'll have to look
Yeah.
for it.
Okay, we're done.
My Scotch collection isn't growing because I've drunk it.
That's what you're supposed to do.
It's a
Alright.
diminishing resource.
It's
But
a-
your waistline is growing.
My waistline is growing.
We don't talk about that.
It's true. Oy, oy, oy. I'll tell you what, I want to share something with you that I found that I enjoy when I don't want to have alcohol. I was going to show it to the class, but I didn't because I forgot. I found this. They make different flavors, but it's called Partake. And they make non-alcoholic beer. And it's no alcohol in it. And this is an IPA. And you can pour it, you can have a glass, you can drink it with lunch. There's no alcohol in it. And it really, really tastes good. And it pours like a beer, like a head on it and everything. And it's wonderful. Partake. You can order it online. They deliver it right to your house.
What's it made from?
It's made from, and I just looked at it before the class, water, barley, hops, and yeast. That's it.
It's just not fermented.
Not fermented, yeah.
I mean, I don't know what they do. Maybe they remove the alcohol. I don't know. They remove the alcohol and they sell it to us as hand sanitizer.
Good one.
Alright. Well, they'll clean your insides out anyway.
You know, Marshall, that the raw material for Scotch is really beer. They
That's
start
right.
with
Cool.
start with beer. They ferment the malt,
That's right.
and then they distill that.
Wow. There are so many scotches that are second casked, finished. If it's finished with another cask, then it's completely allowed. But if it's a first casking in a sherry cask, that's where the whole problem arises. If you wanted to be strict on kashrut. Many people don't care. They say it's a drink. It's less than 1/60th. I'm not going to worry about it. It just depends on your stringency and your approach. But what I enjoy more than the actual Pesach, than the actual ruling, because everybody's going to ultimately do what they want, is how they arrived at the conclusion. How do they find the leniencies? What are the law sources that they go to, and who do they consult, and what opinions do they give? And then I collect the opinions and I put them all together. I'm in the middle of finishing an exam today. I spent about 8 hours yesterday on this exam, and I'm going to finish it today. It's on the halacha of mashgiach kashrut, commercial plant facilities, and the idea of kashrut and things that happen. One of the examples is, it's a bonus question, so it's not even one of the questions. The questions, there was 21 questions, the last 3 were bonus questions, but each question looks simple, but it requires 6 pages of writing for sources. It's really hard, actually, but anyway, it doesn't matter. This is one of the questions. He says, you're a mashgiach in a plant, and it's a bakery plant. And you watched a man go over to one of the big commercial rotating ovens. They have these things that rotate inside. And he greases the machine because it has to be greased every so often. So he greases the machine. And everything has been certified kosher, and the products have been going out of this place all along. He never noticed the mechanical guy that comes along, the maintenance mechanic, and he greases it. So he goes to the supervisor just because he thought about it, of the plant. And the mashgiach says, what are they using for grease? He says, well, they have to use lard because it has to be fit for human consumption. You can't grease with WD-40 or something like that inside of an oven. It's got to be fit for human consumption. What do you do? That's the answer. What do you do? Well, he's not asking me what I would do as a mashgiach. He's asking me, what sources are you going to find to give me to prove that your reasoning is valid? So what should be a 1-sentence answer becomes a 20-minute dissertation, because the issue is now it wasn't done intentionally. The products are already out there. Do I phone the kosher organizations and put a red alert on it and notify everybody that the ovens might have contained lard and therefore the products are not kosher? No, you not necessarily. The first thing you have to do is you have to find out, was the grease used in what quantity and what amount? It was done unintentionally. Does bato vashishim count? We already know that you're not going to sit there with a spoon and eat spoonfuls of animal lard, because that would really be disgusting to you, I think, wouldn't it? Would you take the greasing machinery with it? Would you sit and eat it? Never. Therefore, the idea of eating that is disgusting. It is. Not because it's an animal product, but because it's being used to grease a machine. What kind of a quality and how long has it been sitting like that? And it's probably rancid. Once it's rancid, you can have it. You're allowed to eat it because just a Jewish thing. If it's rancid, you can have it. If it's good tasting, you can't have it. It's not going to be good tasting. Number one, we know that. So therefore, it doesn't render the bakery product not kosher necessarily because of the quantities used to grease the machine. But what do? Meaning you now have to go and source a vegetarian grease, plant-based grease to grease the machinery going onwards, forwards, because you don't want to be doing it intentionally. You want to, if it's unintentional, that's okay. Now that it's going to be intentional because you found out about it, you have to do something and have an action to change that. So that would be, that's going to be my answer, but I haven't gotten to tackle that one yet. It's a bonus. I'm not there yet, but I'm just giving an example of what it's like to think in terms of halacha and the sources and then the final ruling. And then you look at the final ruling and you say, does that speak to me the way I am today and the way I live my life? Like, are you going to follow the issue of Kol Isha? You're allowed to listen to a woman's voice on the radio if it happens to be in a shoe store that you're going grocery shopping or whatever it is, and Celine Dion is playing, you can listen to the radio because you came into the store not to listen to the music, you came into the store to buy groceries. The fact that they're playing music, you don't even care. So you don't have to leave the grocery store because they're playing the voice of a woman singing. In our culture in conservative Judaism, we're not worried about that. But in the Frum community, they're worried about Kol Isha because now the store has a woman standing at a microphone live and she's singing with the guitarist because they want to provide entertainment. You go in, the guy says, hey, I want to take you to a hotel for a business meeting. You go in the hotel, and in the hotel, in the lobby where you're having your coffee to discuss your business meeting, there's a woman and she's singing with the piano player. She's the lounge singer. It's Kol Isha. Can you listen to that? That's not part of our community of worries. We don't think about that. We have women leading services in our davening. But it depends on the community in which you live in and how strict the laws are and what we're going to follow. But how they get to the answer is what interests me, not the actual answer. I don't care. I mean, I do care, but I'm less concerned about the answer than I am about the
Process.
the sources. I enjoy that. Yeah.
Anyone know?
But when you answer your question, Marshall, do you answer it as a conservative Jew or do you answer it as an Orthodox Jew?
It's a mastery in halacha. And in order to get this mastery in halacha, you have to complete 6 courses. So it's like going to any university. This is a yeshiva. And you really want to give the prof the answers that they want to hear. These are
Okay.
this is from Posek in Yerushalayim. You can look him up. He's brilliant. He speaks about and writes and reads and writes and speaks like 12 or 10 languages perfectly. And he has a PhD in linguistics from Yale University. And if I don't give him the answers that he wants, then he'll give me a C-. And I don't want a C-. I want an A. You know what I mean? So I'm going to answer it the way they want to hear it.
Which is stringent.
Which is not necessarily stringent, but not every time. Sometimes it has great leniencies. Can I bring forward all of the strict opinions, all of the lenient opinions, and then I bring forward what the opinions are that we're following, which is followed by most Orthodox communities. I can't give the opinion of what we're following in the conservative community because you won't get a pass. He's not going to accept it's okay to drink non-kosher wines as long as you're not saying Kiddush on it. Because there's no reason to worry about Avodah Zarah, idol worship. That is the conservative opinion for wine. I can't send him that. That's not what he wants to hear. If Ava's my professor, I want to give her exactly what it is that she wants to see on the paper that she taught me. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So are you going to be a mashgiach at the end of the day?
No, but I want to know. I'd like to know. Well, I will know. I probably do know what's involved now in being a mashgiach pretty much. But I would never, first of all, they're not going to hire me anyway. And secondly, I don't want to do that job, and I'm not interested. I'm interested in knowing for my own personal. Listen, I did a course for 3 months on NIDA, on NIDA, the whole women's menstrual cycle, because I found it fascinating from the law standpoint of how these rabbis that were all men made decisions based on how a woman should treat her body and what she should do, and I'm thinking, and look after it and care, based on the idea of separation from men during that period of the month. And I'm thinking, how did they have the chutzpah? Who are they to tell these? You know what I mean? That was my conclusion after it all. But I had to write the exams, and I had to write the exams in a way that I knew that they wanted to hear it, not by my personal beliefs. If I wrote it by my personal thoughts, it would have been a completely different exam than what I had to give them. But it was the hardest exam of all the courses that I wrote. There's a midterm and a final in every course, and they're hard. So I'm trying to share a little bit of what I learned in basic terms with this group, because I thought it's interesting to learn some of the laws, you know, especially when it comes to the wine or the whiskey or technology. I find technology unbelievable how we've come so far with timers today. We don't allow certain things that we should be allowing. Like, if you came into my house on Saturday afternoon, 12 o'clock noon, and all of a sudden you come over for lunch, and all of a sudden you hear the washing machine go on to wash clothes. You hear it, you know. You'd be thinking to yourself, well, that's not very Shabbos-tic. He's washing clothes on Shabbos. I put the detergent in the machine on Friday. I set a timer on the machine to come on at, maybe I set it for, Shabbos ends at 5 o'clock, and I set it for 4 so that when Shabbos is over, it'll be done and I can just throw it in the dryer, right? I want to do it that way. I didn't wash the clothes. I set it on a timer. How is that different from setting a light to come on and off on Shabbos? I'm setting a light to come on and off. And the reason is because a light is accepted by the community, but a washing machine is not. So that's what our rabbis tell us. So we have to follow those rulings. So I find it interesting how they come up with decisions, and even they have to work around everything from the Gemara. We have no Sanhedrin. You know, if we had a Sanhedrin today, I guarantee you they'd paskin you could use your computer on Shabbos. Maybe they wouldn't, but I think they probably would say you can use it for the study of Torah. If b'diavad you happen to flip to a different page and it says something else, well, you didn't do it on purpose. It happened to go to that page, to the eBay page, so you could do shopping. I didn't plan to go there. But if your intention was to study Talmud on Shabbos with the computer, that should be allowed. You know what I mean? Like, it's not work. It's not, the electricity is there. So, you know, it's not like you're going down to the main plant and the plant station and you got a giant switch and then the electricity is coming through and flowing through, you know. So there's all kinds of different things. Anyway, it's all interesting.
That's true.
What about Barbara's question about this Loshan Hora? I'm sure she doesn't mean gossip.
I didn't see it.
Lochan Ora.
Locanora.
Oh,
Locanora. I believe it's a Scotch.
Is there really such a Scotch called Locanhora?
Locan Ora.
Ora.
That's right.
That's funny. I'll have to look it up.
It is. Yeah, that's the way it's spelled. But I didn't think of Lashon Hara. Not at all.
The Loken horror would be the scotch that you would drink when you're doing idle talk. You get it?
That's really an interesting concept. Giving it a whole new twist.
Yeah, very good.
Anyway, thank you so much. Very interesting.
So much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Sharing.
Everybody take care and
Thanks,
stay
Marcia.
well.
If you have questions, send them. Bye.
Thanks.